Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Air travel could be reduced at 40 airports across the US as the government shutdown continues. World leaders gather in Brazil for COP30, but President Trump is not expected to attend. And introducing the Tesla trillionaire, Elon Musk could bag a $1 trillion compensation deal if Tesla shareholders give the go-ahead. Now, the US shutdown continues today, and with it, a warning of reduced air travel at 40 major US airports. US Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy made the announcement as air traffic controllers entered a month without pay. It's believed cancellations could increase over the weekend, affecting up to 4,000 flights a day. Here's what Duffy told the media.
There'll be frustration. We are working with the airlines. They're going to work with passengers. But in the end, our sole role is to make sure that we keep this airspace as safe as possible. There is going to be a 10% reduction in capacity at 40 of our locations. This is not based on what airline travels, has more flights out of what location. This is about where's the pressure and how do we alleviate the pressure.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight, who is, of course, in the studio with me, and correspondent Sara Firth, who is speaking to us from Washington. Sara, thank you so much for joining us. As we said, you are in Washington at the moment in the US. The shutdown is the longest one on record ever. How bad are things likely to get?
Well, Leigh-Ann, as you've just said, it is now the longest US government shutdown of all time. So things here are already pretty bad in Washington, D.C. And it looks like I'm here to stay because Washington's airport's likely to be on the list of those that are potentially going to be affected by the cuts to traffic that have been announced by the Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA. Now, what they've said is there's going to be an expected 10% cut to traffic at 40 major airports across America. So everything from Chicago to Los Angeles to Dallas to Washington, D.C. Expected to be impacted, and many, many more, although we don't have the full official list yet. I mean, to give you an idea of the scale of the impact that this is going to have on flights, it's estimated that at Chicago's airport alone, it would be a loss of some 14,500 seats per day. Now, you just heard from the head of the FAA there. We've also heard from officials today saying that, look, this is about safety. It's not about scoring political points. It is because of the US government shutdown. The knock-on impact of that has essentially been that you've got people, especially air traffic controllers, critical for flight safety. They are working right now without pay. And what that's meant is you've got staff shortages. You've got people who've been calling in sick. The aviation authorities saying they simply cannot safely handle the fatigue and pressure that's being put on the staff, and so these cuts are needed in the traffic to reduce that pressure on the staff at the moment. And the warning, Leigh-Ann, is very clear. The US government shutdown, the impact it's had on staffing, has already compromised safety to a point that we're now seeing where they're having to reduce the traffic and make this unprecedented, they call it, announcement. But the warning very, very bleak that if this continues on longer, and there's no sign that Congress, the Republicans and Democrats are getting any closer to reaching a resolution, that the risk only increases day by day. And so that compromise to safety, a huge warning sound from the aviation authorities here in the US right now.
So, as Sarah says, Shane, a huge warning sign from the aviation authorities over in the States. But we must remember 1.4 million federal workers are without pay or they're on forced leave at the moment, and this is due to this continuing shutdown. Yeah. What impact is it having on employees financially and also the country as a whole?
Well, if you look at sort of the bigger picture, so we were just talking about flights there, and it was interesting. I just was watching, I think Bloomberg and the analysts were saying that it was this issue of aviation and concerns over safety that broke the last shutdown. So the fact that they're now putting plans in to sort of oversee that doesn't really look very optimistic. But if you look at just the US commercial aviation sector, that's worth about 35 billion a week. So if you do like the short maths, 10% of that, if you look at, and if it's only domestic, you're talking about like 2 billion being shaved off the economy, and then you've got all of the people being delayed and the flights and how it'll impact. But if to go back to your question, so if you look at sort of the economy, I think the easiest way to look at it was the previous shutdown, which was sort of the tail end of 2018 into January 2019. And when they look back at the figures of that, it was around 11 billion was lost to GDP over in total. It was what the numbers determined. About 3 billion of that was completely lost permanently. But, which is fine, you know, it's a large sort of $1 trillion economy. But if you look at the workers that you just mentioned, there was also a survey done by the National Treasury Employees Union in 2019, and they found that about a third of the workers missed sort of rent or mortgage payments, which again, you know, that's quite critical. 42% had to resort to using credit cards to cover their basics, and even 20% of them had to go to food banks or to, you know, sort of groceries that would give them sort of lower cost food. So it's quite a bad situation. Yes, like the economy will recover, but it's the workers on the ground. And I think you also need to look at it's not just the workers, because Trump in his last shutdown brought in a policy where they would get back pay. So a lot of these, yeah, even though they have to maybe resort to using their credit cards, a lot of them will hopefully get this money back when it goes through. But if you look at all of the supplementary industries that are not directly paid by the Federation, so the cleaner that, you know, that cleans a lot of these buildings, or, you know, a gardener that's hired in the parks, you know, all of these people, these are not working at the moment, but they're not going to get the back pay. So I think they're the ones that are going to be sort of impacted, and all of the small businesses that depend on federal contracts that are now not being paid, they are highly unlikely to get sort of back pay. So there's a lot of people that are going to be impacted, and there was a really interesting CNN report done where it went through all of the federal sort of agencies, and, you know, small businesses that depend on loans from the federal government, those are going to be halted. There's a lot of people, I think there's 42 million Americans that depend on, you know, sort of low-cost food. Those are all frozen. There's 8,000 children that use a program called Head Start, which is for low-income workers on education. So all of these are on hold at the moment.
So I think we can also just come to the conclusion that Donald Trump is talking right now over in the States. He says no concerns over air safety. That's what he's currently said at the moment.
Yeah, which was the issue last time that seemed to be.
But it was the issue last time that did break the deadlock over that period, which is completely correct. But then the Democrats are not moving either. So we're seeing a standoff, Sarah, between the Democrats and the Republicans at the moment at such a crucial time for so many people in America. It's both parties that are refusing to budge. And I don't know what the answer is, Sarah, right now. Is it the filibuster, to terminate the filibuster? But it's difficult to blame one side or another because both are as bad as each other right now.
Yes, and there's plenty of blame to go around, Leigh-Ann, and expect that noise, that blame to grow even louder as you see the impact on everyday Americans growing. You know, as Shane was saying there, the impact already on some of the poorest in the country, but on those federal workers having to manage right now without pay, they are really feeling this government shutdown. But by and large, the sort of wider American public have been fairly insulated from the impacts of that. And of course, with this changes to the flight traffic, as a way to sort of ease the pressure, that potentially causing in the coming days flight cancellations, people stranded, missing flights. It's around the holiday time. You've got Thanksgiving coming up, and all of that is going to be felt. And you're absolutely right. The Democrats and Republicans, they are no closer to agreeing on their disputes over the federal funding. There really doesn't seem to be much negotiation or signs of negotiation going on. You've had President Trump speaking out in the last couple of days. He's calling on Republicans to vote to end the filibuster. Now, quietly behind the scenes, Republicans are saying they simply don't have the numbers to pass that. And they also know that, look, if you get rid of the filibuster, even if that were possible within a sort of time frame that would be reasonable to end the government shutdown, which it's not clear at all that it would be, that, you know, once that party is back in opposition, you've lost the power. So it's not a hugely popular idea, even amongst many of Trump's loyal supporters. So there is a feeling here in the US right now, as these much more drastic measures are announced and as this government shutdown drags on with no sign of a resolution in sight, that really the United States is in pretty uncharted territory here.
Yes, indeed. Shane and Sara, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Stay right there as we move on to another story now. And world leaders are gathering in Belém, Brazil, today for COP30, the annual summit on tackling climate change. It's the first time Brazil has hosted the event, which has been held in the Amazon rainforest. President Trump is not expected to attend after rolling back on commitments, but UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and British heir to the throne, Prince William, are there following the Earthshot Prize ceremony. Here's what Prince William had to say a little bit earlier.
And so as we gather here in Belém, 10 years on from the Paris Agreement, we are reminded of the extraordinary power of nations, communities, and individuals coming together to drive change. I grew up with my father, the King, talking about the power of nature and the importance of harmony in the natural world, a subject he has championed for over 5 decades. It's a privilege to also represent him here today, as well as everyone else who has championed this cause for so many years.
Shane, a double hitter from the UK, I felt. Keir Starmer, Prince William.
Yeah.
Yep, they're all there. What's on the agenda at COP, and how unusual is it for the US president to be a no-show?
There is going to be a lot of people. When I looked up, there's going to be 53 heads of state, but it really kind of falls into irrelevance when the fact that the 4 largest sort of countries are the biggest players: China, the US, India, and Russia. They're not sending their leaders. And even the EU is sending a fairly sort of minor delegation. In terms of Trump not being there, it's no massive surprise. He's got a lot to be dealing with domestic politics, as we just said. And also, if you look at COP, when I can't remember what number it was, but when it was in Dubai, Biden didn't come. I think I remember it was Kamala Harris that arrived out in Expo City. So it's not really that much of a shock that he's not here. But I think. While I'm all in favour of climate change, I think COP is just a little bit, the optics are just not great around it. And again, holding it in the middle of the Amazon. And like you said, every year there's always about, all of these leaders flying in on planes. And that doesn't look really good. And I kind of think like the real sort of crown in sort of the jewel of this COP is something called Tropical Forest Forever Facility. Catchy name, I'll give it that. And this is basically to conserve endangered forests, and obviously, because it's in the Amazon. And Brazil is obviously advocating this. This is it's really, real big push, and it's big agenda for this COP. And even though the UK sent its Prime Minister and the heir to the throne, they helped set up and organise this fund, but they're not giving any money to it. So it's not looking good. I think by the end of the COP, unfortunately, the Tropical Forest Forever facility will probably be forgotten, and we'll move on to COP31, unfortunately. So I think for all of the sort of stark comments that we're getting from the UN Secretary General, I think I am not very optimistic that there's going to be much out of this meeting.
And it's really interesting, isn't it, when we have a look at where it's been held. And Sara is going to tell us a little bit more about the controversy on the location of this year's event. As we did say, and Shane said there, it is in Brazil, which is raising a lot of eyebrows.
It is. I mean, you always have a little bit of controversy surrounding the amount of energy that's extended to get world leaders to these gatherings. So flying in on their private jets, adding to the carbon emissions, for example, always gains some raised eyebrows and some critique. But this year, of course, it's happening in the rainforest in Brazil. And there isn't the infrastructure necessarily already in place to be able to pull off an event like this. And so they're having to do some building works in the rainforest. And that has raised concerns amongst environmental campaigners about, the whole practicality of the location of this, given that it's supposed to be about protecting nature and the climate, and already happening under such dismal conditions with the US not being in attendance. Remember, President Trump has called climate change the biggest con job. He's been pretty aggressive in his second term, capitalizing on some of the moves that he made during his first term, pulling out of those climate agreements and aggressively criticizing countries like the European countries who are still vocally very much committed to some of these agreements and to trying to push this climate change agenda forward. He's had some pretty stark warnings for them. Look, you had a situation where you had, back when it was the Paris Climate Accord signed, 200 nations getting together to pledge to keep this line of global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. The UN coming out this week saying, look, they're not on track for that. In fact, they're on track at the moment, I think the UN saying, for Earth to likely overshoot on its way to 2.6 degrees Celsius. And the warning from the UN is what that would mean. Mountain glaciers would be at risk. You'd have coral reefs destroyed. Just some of the ways the natural world would be impacted. And so add to that the optics of them building roads and infrastructure in the rainforest simply to accommodate this meeting that already feels like it's kind of dead on arrival, given the missing world leaders, not just President Trump, but many others following suit. You've got Russia, Japan, China, as Shane said, also Turkey likely not attending this. So it's difficult to see how any of the measures agreed there, given those absent and that vacuum that will create, how any of those measures can really have any bite.
And it's really interesting when I have a look at COP every single year. It is the European countries often that are still sticking by climate change. Yeah. And I did have a guest on earlier who was from Afghanistan, and he was really interesting to speak to because often I do think it's the developing world that struggle when it comes to climate change. Coal burning, fossil fuels are still important. Electricity is not available like it is in European countries. And I often wonder if COP isn't catering enough to the developing countries that are feeling the climate change impact, and it's all about calling it from a Western platform.
Well, yeah, like I looked into sort of the bigger numbers, and we just had ADIPEC, which is the great big oil conference in Abu Dhabi, sort of just last week. So you mentioned electricity. So in 2015, sort of 10 years ago, around I think 23% of it was coming from green. Now it's about 32, which I think is still not a lot of progress if you look at 10 years when we had that
because it's
huge
very
momentum.
expensive.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that is sort of wind and solar. And also, I think because, as Sara said, Trump has said it's the great sort of con job is climate change. And I think a lot of countries around the world have now seen that as an endorsement that they can sort of pull back on their policies. And this is shown in the figures specifically that have come out from Bloomberg, because before we were seeing average growth of say like about 25% year on year in terms of investment in green and renewables. Last year it was only 11%.
But so, Donald Trump wasn't in last year.
No, but everybody knew that he was coming into it. So I think that the sort of narrative is changing. So I would say it's going to decrease even further in the years ahead, because as you said, a lot of the developed countries that are making the demands, but also they're now struggling economically, and like the EU is, the UK, so they can't even really implement their own green policy. So I don't think they're in a position to sort of lecture to developing countries.
But I also think the problem is, Shane, like in the UK, they tried to use heat pumps so that so much electricity wasn't being used with gas boilers. We saw that, but it was vastly expensive and most people can just not afford it. And this has been a lot of the problem when it comes to renewable energy and the arguments surrounding it.
Yeah, and it's the reliability of getting, with solar power and wind getting it onto the grid. There's a lot of issues. But I think the COP doesn't have very good optics, like I said. Even when it was held here in Dubai, there was the talk about sort of fossil fuels. And in fairness, the numbers do show that investment in fossil fuels dropped. But I think investing more in wind and solar is a good idea, because these are natural resources. I think, the days of drilling oil are, will eventually peter out, and in my mind, it just makes more sense to use solar panels and wind power. Which you're looking at me like that's a no, but
no, I'm not looking at you like it's a no.
Hydroelectricity.
Hydroelectricity.
It works well enough in Scandinavia.
Kariba Dam in Zimbabwe, we have hydroelectricity. I'm not looking at you in any certain way. I just think we've got a long way to go. But thank you so much, Shane and Sara, for your thoughts on that. Let's move on now. And Elon Musk could become the world's first trillionaire if Tesla shareholders approve his latest compensation plan. The annual shareholders meeting takes place in Austin, Texas today. It all hinges on whether Elon Musk can increase Tesla's value to over $8 trillion, making it the most valuable company in history. Well, this is not going to be a bad payday. Talk us through this compensation deal, and is it achievable, and is Elon Musk worth it?
That is a very good question. He's already the richest man on earth, so he's not doing badly. But look, as you said, Leigh-Ann, that shareholders meeting is underway in Austin, Texas. We're expecting the results of that vote around his pay packet to be announced possibly in the next hour or so. Look, it is a massive pay packet, but there are some pretty strict requirements that go along with it. Largely speaking, people here in Washington, D.C., who've been discussing this are expecting it to pass. They think that Elon will get that pay packet that he's after. It will mean that he could be worth nearly $1 trillion in stock. It seems ridiculous, especially at this time in America right now, with the economy so in flux, to be talking about a trillionaire, but that is what he's on the path to. But he is going to be expected to sing for his supper if he gets that, as you said. The full package would be would be $1 trillion, but he would have to get the value increase of Tesla to $8.5 trillion. And there's 12 tranches that he has to meet and requirements along the way with that. So, for example, for the first tranche that he has to hit, we know that milestone, he needs to make sure Tesla hits a market capitalization of $2 trillion. And then for every other one of those 12 tranches, they need to see Tesla have a $500 billion value increase. These numbers sound ridiculous, but as we said, Elon Musk, he's already the wealthiest man, set to get even richer if this vote passes.
You know what? I was just thinking about what Sara said to me, Shane, off the cuff. She said it does sound insane, but AI... We could see, like NVIDIA, for instance, if we look at NVIDIA as a chip company.
Yeah, I wish I'd invested in them,
Yeah, I know, right? How much is that worth now? Imagine you had invested in AI.
4 times your return would be in about a short speed of time. So.
And that's been absolutely incredible. And, we mustn't forget that Tesla's not just a car company, it's a tech company.
Yeah.
So, he could hit this 8.5 trillion in a decade if we're talking about tech, if we're talking about AI, if we're talking about robots.
Yeah, cyber trucks, the whole lot. Like, I think he will get to be a trillionaire. Like, if you think 10 years ago, he had a minor 20 billion or something.
Oh, is that it?
and now he's up to $500 billion. So I think it's likely that he will get there. And, you know, full transparency, I did buy Tesla shares a while ago when they were down, and, you know, they're now going up, which I'm glad to see.
Are you going to make us sing for our supper? Will you take Sara and I out for
Well,
dinner?
I don't have $1 trillion, unfortunately. But like they're up. It's up about like 60% in the last 6 months, and it is weird when you look at it that it was all to do with sort of the politics, and when he's now stepped away from it. And part of the sort of the voting package is that they're going. Investors will vote on whether Tesla should be formally politically neutral. And I think it's interesting that they've put that into the mix, because they probably just saw what happened, you know, with the Trump. So it's to kind of rein Musk in and to put a formality that, you know, he won't go back to sort of trying to solve the, you know, Washington's problems. But it'd be interesting to see where the vote goes, because the Norwegians have already come out and said that they don't support this. The Californian retirement system, similarly. And I thought it was interesting as well is that the fact that, you remember the Delaware court objected to his last package. And now the fact that they've moved Tesla to Texas, that makes it more advantageous and they can't sue as opposed to when it was previously in California.
That's a good point. I forgot about that, actually.
Yeah, so I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then the other point I think is interesting as well is that they have a criteria called supermajority voting requirement, which again is another catchy phrase. They're looking to do away with that. So that will give Elon Musk not only $1 trillion, but more power within Tesla itself. But then, to be honest, I think Elon Musk and Tesla, you can't really distinguish the two. One is basically the other.
And
my opinion.
I agree with that, and I don't know if Sara agrees with that too, but Elon Musk is Tesla, and before Elon Musk came into Tesla, Tesla wasn't going anywhere. He's made Tesla the brand it is, and of course, he's the brains behind the robo-taxi, which is apparently coming out at some point. We've been waiting for it for a little while, and these humanoid robots. SpaceX, we can't forget. You know, there's lots in the pot when it comes to Tesla, and I don't know, Sara, could you imagine Tesla without Elon Musk?
No, I mean, he is so synonymous with the brand. And look, this is exactly what investors who agree that he should get this pay packet are saying, that Elon Musk is Tesla, Tesla is Elon Musk. And so they want him to be tied to Tesla for the long haul, for the next decade at least, in this way, because despite his controversies, they think he's the man who can. On a side note, Leigh-Ann, we need to get an investment WhatsApp group going with Shane, because he is our investment guru. Tesla shares and gold. I think we need to be taking some more investment tips from the man who's in the know.
Well, I think, we're fully capitalist. I don't really think there's an issue with giving someone $1 trillion if you increase the value of the company like more than 8-fold. And he's not doing it for the money. He's already the richest man in the world. But he's the kind of person that if you set a target and a goal, he'll work to achieve it. And also, if he does manage to achieve this single-handedly, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't enjoy some of the reward from it.
And, you know, I would agree with that completely, because I remember when it was, I can't remember when it was, but a few years ago now, when there was a problem with the cheaper model of the Tesla that they were trying to bring out. There was a combustion problem with the engine. And I remember Elon Musk saying, I slept on the floor for months. I figured out that problem with my engineers. I was there. And that's really what made Tesla come into the market of affordability. Because remember, before that, a lot of people couldn't afford a Tesla. And he worked so hard on that. And I think we can't forget how dedicated Elon Musk has been. Yes, he went a little bit crazy. You know, if we see him when it came to Donald Trump dancing on the stage with the chainsaw, you know, there was a lot going on there.
But he's going to face a lot of issues. Like, Trump's going to be in there for a while. We know, as we said in the last segment, he's not a fan of climate change or EVs. In Europe, the latest figures for October for Tesla are out, and they're down like 50% in some of the countries. China's down about 10%. He's got issues in India with production and trying to get domestic plants. But the only thing I think is that a lot of the other EV models in the US aren't performing super well, but he's also got competition coming from BYD. I've got a lot of BYD
cabs here,
Ubers, and I particularly do like them. So he's got a lot of issues, But I think I have a lot of faith in Elon Musk that he can turn things around.
I've got faith in Elon Musk, and I think we've convinced Sarah to have faith in Elon Musk. So let's see how that vote goes. Stay right there as we move on to another story now. And have you ever heard of vibe coding? Well, believe it or not, I haven't. But Collins Dictionary has chosen it as this year's word of the year. It was coined by OpenAI co-founder Andre Karpathy to describe the art of making an app or website by describing it to artificial intelligence rather than writing programming code manually. Other words on the list include biohacking, task masking, and broligarchy. Okay, I don't know even where to start with all of those, but there we go. We've got some new words out and about. Shane, have you ever used the term vibe coding? I kind of broke it down in that intro, but what's the story?
No, I have never even heard of this word until you told me about this segment today, which I don't know whether that makes me really old or out of touch. I don't know. But I'll come to my theory that is not the case. But basically, let's start with what vibe coding is. According to the Collins Dictionary, it's the art of making an app or website by describing it to artificial intelligence rather than writing programming code manually. So I tried it out earlier today, and I put in a load of my credit card receipts, which are embarrassingly big, and I said, can you come up with an app that'll analyze these and help me to see how much I'm spending on Deliveroo and how much I'm spending on Tesla shares, all of that kind of malarkey. And yeah, it told me all how to do it. So I didn't go through the end because I was busy preparing for this, but so, it is a genuine thing, but I genuinely never heard of it. And I think that the Collins Dictionary is kind of like really off that they're picking words that, the majority of us have never heard of it. And I'm a journalist. I generally like to think I read up a lot. But also, I think dictionaries, when was the last time anyone ever used a dictionary? So I think dictionaries are kind of going to be absolutely obsolete pretty soon. And if you look at some of the previous sort of words of the year that they've had, last year was brat. Remember Charlie
XCX.
Yeah, I had to look.
Yeah, Charlie XCX.
Because I'm very cool.
Yeah.
And then before that, it was NFTs. Where are NFTs really?
Non-fungible tokens.
Exactly. Lockdown was obviously 2020. Climate strike. So to bring it all around, one of the other words that Collins had was aura farming, is when you try and do things to look cool. And I think this is what Collins is doing. They're aura farming by going down the, what's it called again? Vibe. Lost the word. Vibe coding. Like, had you heard of this before?
Can I tell you something? I must admit, I feel like, I'm guessing Sarah's going to agree with me here because we're all journalists, and I feel like I'm pretty well read, and I watch a lot of news, and I actually watch a lot of financial news too. I try to keep up with the newspapers, and I don't think, Sarah, you can tell us some other words on the list, but to be honest, I hadn't come across any of these.
No, I mean, vibe coding, I had no idea. I didn't realize that it was giving directions to AI. I mean, I thought it was about, perhaps maybe the vibes of the place that you're in. I can tell you guys right now, the vibes in Washington, not so cool. But you look at the other words on the list, so many, you sort of wonder, is this a younger generational thing that Collins is sort of picking up on more popular words for the younger generation? Other words on the list that sort of caught my attention, broligarchy. I mean, I could see myself using that maybe, but I've never heard of it. It's apparently to describe the clique of elite, wealthy men. And I thought, well, us journalists have a different but much ruder word that we probably couldn't say on air for that.
Henry, I've heard of.
Yeah, look, it's... Henry, so that is high
earner, not rich yet.
I had never heard of that one either.
One of my reporters used it in a story recently about apps, because you're considered a poor millionaire if you got less than only 5 million.
Wow.
So that's considered a Henry, that you're earning a lot, but you're not considered rich yet.
Considered rich?
Well, Elon Musk rich anyway.
Well, no one's Elon Musk rich. But I do find these words quite fascinating. And Sarah, you actually said something to me that I thought was quite interesting. You said that they all seem quite techie, and they do. So I wonder if Collins is trying to tap into the younger, techie, cool generation.
Who don't use dictionaries.
Well,
you don't use it, they use TikTok.
But I was just thinking, what do you use if you can't spell something? I always put it into Google wrong and then it corrects it for me.
Yeah.
I've got to that stage in my life.
Predictive text, nobody, I think, really uses dictionaries anymore.
No, that's true.
Yeah, exactly, which is the problem, I think. But you were saying before what other words you would like to see.
Oh, yeah, Sarah and Shane, I don't know if there's other words that you... Shane actually came up with a word, and we think that this should be the word.
Yeah, well, with a new Muslim New York mayor, I would like to see inshallah, which is very common around Dubai and in this part of the world, maybe be embraced globally and become word of the year for 2026.
And inshallah, Sarah uses too.
I fully endorse that.
Yeah.
I fully endorse that. Yeah, we've got a Turkish, British, American household, so inshallah is used a lot in our household, and I will tell you that our interpretation of it is usually meant as, well, we'll see about that, but probably not.
But the actual interpretation of it is God willing. So, inshallah, God willing. Yeah, I think that's a great choice, actually, Shane. Shane's not into the vibe coding, but he's into the God willing. So thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Now, it's that time of the show where Shane and Sarah have chosen two of their quirkiest stories of the day. And Shane, we're going to start with your story. And no, we're not, Sarah. We're going to start with your story first. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong questions. Very professional of me here. Let's start with you. And you've chosen to tell us all about the Beaver supermoon.
The Beaver supermoon, yes, I have. The pictures, guys, are just phenomenal. And I thought, as we're discussing climate change with COP30 coming up, it's a nice moment to perhaps pay a little nod of tribute to the natural world in this way. So you just had the largest supermoon of 2025. It is called the Beaver moon, and it occurs when the moon is at its closest point to Earth, which apparently is called perigee, and just appears humongous, basically. The proximity makes it seem 16% brighter than an average full moon, and up to 30% brighter than the most distant full moon of the year. Now, guys, why is it called the Beaver full moon? Well, it's because back in the days when you had hunter-gatherers or indigenous communities who were using the stars, the natural world for guidance, you had indigenous Native Americans who would observe the moon and the beavers around this time who start building their dams and getting ready for the big winter freeze. And they would use that as a signal to themselves go out and hunt and get prepared for the long winter ahead. So I thought that was quite a nice little nod to the interconnectedness, although these days, as we've just heard with the vibe coding, you know, it's all very techie, we're all on our apps and our phones all the time and relying on modern technology, but it's a nice little nod and reminder. And watching those beautiful images from all around the world of how people saw the supermoon across the world, it was really fascinating, really beautiful. And yeah, just a little reminder that, as Carl Sagan says, I think it is, you know, we're made of star stuff. It's a nice little nod to that and to nature and our kind of rapport with nature, even though we largely forget it sometimes.
Oh, I completely agree. Those pictures were beautiful. I did see the moon last night, and I'm trying to think, but I do remember thinking, oh, it was quite bright when I went for my dog walk. And also, I felt a little bit crazy yesterday, and sometimes that can be brought on by the full moon.
Full moons.
Yeah, full moons. I don't know why.
Blame it on the moon. I always do that.
Yeah, I feel like I've got a lot to blame on the moon for yesterday. Anyway.
For a lunatic.
Yeah, well, definitely, yes, indeed. And Shane, I also want to talk about this. There's a new list out today testing how posh you are.
Yeah, so we've had word of the year. So this is from a gentleman called Nicky Haslam, who is an Eton-educated interior designer to the stars. People like sort of Mick Jagger, and he's also friends with Queen Camilla. So very high in British society. So for the last 7 years, he's brought out these tablecloths, which are retail at about like £50. And he puts 40 words on it, which constitute, if you use them, then you're common. So it's. Speaking of COP30, the word energy is on there. And if you use any of these words, bits and bobs, what's not to like, bums on seats, I'm a hugger, and growth. So, and I think that some of those are okay. The one I thought I definitely agree with is jacket potatoes. I think jacket potatoes, you're definitely common. I can't imagine a posh person having a jacket potato.
I don't know why. I'm a bit
controversial, Shane.
Yeah,
exactly.
I would agree with Sarah, because what would you call it that would be posh? Like a baked potato, maybe?
Sweet sweet potato fries or something like that, or sweet potato, I think is definitely a bit
Jacket,
more...
spud, beans and cheese.
Air fryers, apparently, that they're really, really common. Wordle, I've never done, actually, I have to say. And also, I think this is interesting as well, if you refer to your brothers and sisters as siblings, that's no longer posh, that's now common. If you use biomass, again, this guy is obviously clearly not a climate change advocate because a lot of it is in there. And then striped socks.
Striped socks.
I always thought like that would be like an eccentric posh person.
I always thought that was an eccentric posh person because, you know, I don't know, Sarah and Shane, if you've seen this in the UK, I think some of the eccentric posh people can wear like the pink trousers, you know, the pink chaps, and then they've got like quite funky socks, and then you always kind of know they have money, don't they? They're always a little bit eccentric.
Yeah, slightly lunatic, eccentric. And he's put stuff like Nobel Prizes and Stonehenge, but like I think this would be my dream job when I get to his advanced ages, where you can just decide what is posh and what's common and what's in and what's out, to have that level of power. But I think, to be honest, a lot of it is fairly tongue-in-cheek and fairly jokey.
Oh my gosh, he says if you locking your car in your drive,
yeah,
that means you're not posh. Well, I don't know, maybe it means that you're sensible.
Yeah, or you just get the servants to lock it for you or something.
Oh, posh people have a garage.
A garage.
Someone told me that in my ear, a garage. Anyway, I didn't think of it myself. But yes, apparently sunblock 2 is another interesting one.
Yeah, because if you're posh, you wouldn't go in the sun, God forbid.
But my favourite one, I don't know, I'm just going to say this, Shane and Sarah, is I'm a hugger, because I'm not a hugger. I don't like people touching me. So I think that maybe I'm a little bit posh, because I don't say that.
Maybe.
You are the poshest amongst us, Leigh-Ann. That is indisputable.
Yeah, we're within hugging distance line as well, so it's fine.
But thank you so much to our guest today, Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight, who joined me in the studio, and correspondent Sara Firth speaking to us from Washington. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. G&T is coming up next. Goodbye. Thank you for watching and have a lovely evening.